Welcome to another conversation with Joe Reagan. And Joe, today we have a guest. We have somebody you can talk to besides me. And her name is Kristy Milligan, who is of Westside Cares, who is the boss. And the reason I've invited her is since you both are involved in nonprofits, how is the big, beautiful bill, that's quote unquote, going to affect both of you in the financing of your organizations? So, Joe,
Wow.
meet Kristy. Kristy, meet Joe.
Well, and as I said when we were chatting a little bit before we started, I've had the opportunity to meet Kristy before and learn a lot about what Westside Care does. And again, when you look at our the challenges that we face in regards to our unhoused populations as well as those struggling with housing instability, this is an area that most voters in the district believe is something that we really need to be adjusting for. And of course, there's a number of different partners that do that. And, I'd say, just off the top of the head, when we talk about some of the different programs, the running tally I have is somewhere between 4 to 6 million in lost funding directly from federal grants impacting housing programs alone here in El Paso County. And I'll let Kristy dig into that because I'm sure she's more versed into it. But I think one that I was speaking with the other day was on food instability. And that if you're familiar with the Care and Share program, which operates across the state, right now they're looking at a shortfall of about 2 million pounds of food that they're not going to be able to bring, and that is not accounting for the increased demand. So 2 million pounds of food short of what they would typically have in a year like this. And they are already starting to see increased demand. And we know from historical trends that as we get into the holidays, we'll continue to see those trends unfortunately go up. So that alone, that's the direct impact. And I can also speak to the indirect funding as well. Because as nonprofits, when we start to go out and engage with different partners, the economic situation is causing the philanthropic budgets of some of the major funders to programs here in El Paso County is also starting to drive. People are being more cautious with what they want to support. And so we're seeing some of these organizations that would typically, gladly throw out a couple $1,000s to support some of these key programs. And now they're like, well, we're not really sure we can do it this year. So that's the secondary impact of not just the cuts, but also the impacts of, poor economic management is having on the ability of our corporations to support these things and individuals as well. But Kristy, yeah, I always love talking about the housing thing because it isn't such an important issue. And it's something that I think a lot of people really don't fully understand the issues and the realities facing our unhoused population and those with housing instability.
Yeah. I didn't have to share about the direct impacts. I wish I did, but the truth is, it's it's a landscape that is constantly shifting as it relates to proposals that are being considered. As you know, the Colorado legislature has recently looked at the cuts to our state that are associated with the Big Beautiful Bill and special congressional session, which effectively just kicked down the can, to 2026 to see where in the state we're going to make those cuts. What I do know, Westside Cares is a privately supported organization, top to bottom, front to back. That has been a deliberate choice, not only because of the administrative burden, but also precisely because of moments like this, the ephemerality of that federal funding. This is the priority one year, this is the priority a different year. That means that we are well situated as an organization to maintain continuity of services for people experiencing poverty. But those secondary impacts that you've mentioned, such as, we have 6 food pantries, all of whom rely on food from Care and Share. We are currently one of just a couple of organizations offering rental assistance in El Paso County. And so there are those secondary impacts. And then there are, of course, the tertiary impacts, which are the programs are being cut, which is increasing need. And so the influx to small privately funded organizations like Westside Cares, yes, we will absolutely rise to the challenge and endeavor to meet the need. But more and more people are becoming homeless. more and more people are losing their access to critical benefits. We are terrified about the implications for Medicaid and ultimately Medicare for populations. Those cuts are going to medical debt is the leading cause of bankruptcy in the United States, and the average American does not have $1,000 saved for an emergency. So we are really on the precipice of a disaster, and organizationally, we're solid and prepared to rise to the challenge, but the tide is going to wash over us because we can only rise so far. And with the bleeding budget cuts, for example, our housing navigation program, we see 500 people a year. We're lucky if we can place 10% of those people into permanent housing of some kind. And at this moment, there is no hope of any housing choice vouchers being rolled out this year in this community by our local housing authority. That will have profound impacts. And, some of the emergency housing vouchers that were issued at the beginning of the pandemic on an 8-year time frame are sunsetting on December 31st of this year. So it will effectively render people who have been housed and who have gained some stability, but who may not have the ability to amplify their income, it'll put them right back on the street.
Yep. And that raises a really interesting question too, because I think that this is an area where when we're talking about some of these long-term programs, right, sustainability is key, right? It's not just about getting someone into temporary, transitional, or permanent housing, but also making sure they have the resources needed for that long-term sustainability. And those are the programs that go well beyond just the vouchers, but actually having what we call the wraparound services and making sure that that's sustainable. And that I think also falls into those tertiary aspects of, right, if the job market is not as great, well, then it's going to be harder for those folks to get job placements as well. Talk to some of the experiences that clients are having, what that looks like in a what we might want to call a quasi-normal situation as to where kind of that is now and where it might be headed in the near future.
Yeah, well, I think that we fail to recognize as a society how close each one of us are to the edge. So many people I speak with say, "Gosh, I had no idea this could ever happen to me." But it's one bad day. It's a car that breaks down and you can't get to work, and so you lose your job. And as a result of losing your job and not having reliable transportation that you can fix, you then can't pay your rent, and then you're evicted. And now you're trying to get a place with an eviction, and you're living on the streets, and your stuff gets stolen or swept away by the hot team. I mean, we are all one bad day away from this kind of life. And I think that a lot of folks never expected to be in this situation. One of the things that has been both interesting and heartbreaking to me is I was speaking with a young woman recently. She was able to convert her voucher from a federal voucher to a state voucher, which theoretically is very good because theoretically state funding is a little bit more stable. I mean, I know the state is going to be looking to make some budget cuts, but it's theoretically more stable. And I said, are you following all this news about the possibility that you're going to lose your SNAP and your Medicaid, and possibly even this housing voucher? And she said, I haven't been following the news because most of us realize that we could lose everything in an instant. And to follow the details would break our hearts because we already know that everything could be taken away. And I think we're just going to see more and more of that.
That's what I think. One of the areas when I'm talking to folks that have never been involved in programs like this, there's a huge misperception of, well, all of these homeless people must be the ones that are panhandling. That's what this problem looks like to the majority of folks. And they're like, I've seen the same person panhandling on the same corner for years now. This is a choice by them. And I don't think that, as you said, we're all surprisingly close to finding ourselves in that situation. And it's, but that is the difference of the most visible part of our unhoused population is the chronic homeless that are also dealing with chronic mental health, undiagnosed mental health issues. and those lots of addiction and substance misuse. And but the majority of individuals who are homeless are families and people that might be working multiple jobs and just haven't had that ability to do that. Um, how do we take that message to more folks in the county? Because we talk about how SNAP benefits can impact this. You talk about how Medicare, Medicaid, and medical insurance bills being that driver of debt, being that piece that suddenly, how do we make that case to folks that aren't familiar with this issue to say, this could be you, and the people that are dealing with this are more like you than you can possibly imagine. In fact, you might interact with them. This could be your barista. This could be someone that's serving you at a fast food joint, and that their income just simply doesn't allow them affordable housing or any housing in this community. What have you found to be an effective way to tell that story and to show and I don't want to be cold about this, but oftentimes I go back on the economic piece of this, which is by making these smaller investments early, we actually save ourselves a substantial amount in the long term. By making those investments in some of these key programs, it saves us more than when we're dealing with, a housing crisis. That's going to cost more than, hey, this is coming down the pipe. We can intercept, like you said, your rental support, the rental support program, which is one of those things of, hey, if we can prevent that person from becoming homeless, it's actually going to save us a lot of money in the long term, and it's a better outcome for the individual. How do you tell that story?
Well, Joe, that's what I'm counting on you to do. Um, I mean, I've been at this work for a minute or two, and I think that one of the challenges that we face, uh, often I'll have funders or philanthropists or thought leaders or students, any number of people saying, what magic wand would you wave? What if you could change one thing? What would be the thing that you would change? And I firmly believe that if we saw people experiencing homelessness, housing insecurity, and poverty as someone's child, someone's brother, someone's sister, someone's best friend, someone's parent, if we saw them as actual human beings, that we would never stand for what happens in this country. And in fact, there are studies that bear that out. A 2003 study found that the medial prefrontal cortex, which is the part of your brain that lights up when you are engaging with another human being, yours is lit up right now because you're looking at me. Mine is lit up because I'm looking at you. In this study, they discovered that people who were exposed to images of people in extreme outgroups, namely people experiencing poverty and homelessness, that medial prefrontal cortex did not even light up, which is to say that human beings would interact with other human beings and they wouldn't even recognize that they were interacting with another human being. So the first thing that I would change is to restore our concept of humanity for every human being. And I don't yet know how to do that. That's the
Mm.
magic wand. That's the problem I'd love for you to solve, Joe. I haven't been able to get there. What I do know is that, um, the reason that Airbnbs and all of these hotel chains and all of these VRBOs, the reason that we have so many options is because people who are housed might want to travel, might need to travel. They want different options for their unique needs. And to that end, what we know about programming is that you spoke about sort of different demographics within the homeless community. People who are unhoused, people who might be doubling up, people who might be with their whole families. People are unique, and we need multiple unique interventions. And I think number one, the notion that any of us stand to gain anything by denigrating a model that serves someone is hogwash, and we need to dispense with that. And also, I mean, coming together and providing these multiple interventions is going to be critical, and not denigrating other models. The other thing that I am disinclined to do 8 years into this work, people say to us, oh gosh, if you can just bring me the data that shows that it'll save taxpayers $30,000 to $50,000 a year if we just get this person into housing, maybe we'll look at it differently. And so then I chase my tail and I create a white paper and I send it over, and people who aren't inclined to have their minds changed are not going to have their minds changed regardless. So I have stopped chasing my tail when I don't believe that someone is authentic or earnest in their effort to learn more about this issue.
Yep. No, and it's extraordinarily frustrating because I've got that too. Where well, show me that, and it's like, well, listen, at some point I have to say, I've done the work. I know the problem, and you need to take the effort to also find out for yourself. And, it sounds like a small thing, but one of the things when I engage with folks, and often you probably get this question too, right? What do I do when a homeless person asks me for money when they're panhandling? Should I give them money or not?
Which is an earnest question, so I love it.
It is. And it's funny because people, and I think people always expect you to say, well, you should give them money. And I said, do whatever you want. I said, but acknowledge them. And they're like, what? I said, say hello. When you're seeing somebody on the side, when they wave to you, wave back. Acknowledge the human element of it. And, and I've had that, especially when I'm cycling around town, if I'm stopped at an intersection and there's someone panhandling next to me, I don't have the option of rolling up the window. You treat them like another person. Hey, how's it going? Obviously you're having a tough time, but hopefully you're, connecting with resources. Tell me what's your name? Even those basic things that allow someone to say, yes, you are a human being. And I acknowledge that you're a human being. It does make a world of difference for both people in that interaction. And I think that those are those small things that when people say, what can I do? Just say hello.
Yeah, it's great advice.
But on the deeper policy side too, like you said, giving communities the flexibility to be able to address that. And I know that, there's several organizations that I've worked with in the past that don't accept state or federal funding because of the fact that there's often restrictions on what the rules have to be and what you can and can't do. And the reality is sometimes you need that flexibility for folks to make sure that we're able to connect them with the resources. And I know for a lot of people, it's really uncomfortable to have those conversations around like, well, sometimes you're going to get someone that's going to show up drunk. And if you let them sleep on the streets drunk and it's too cold outside, well, guess what? They're going to die. So we got to have a place for them to go to where they can be safe. And it's an opportunity to say, hey, you came in last night and you weren't well. Here's some resources on maybe how you can handle substance misuse or have those conversations. So I think it is important to maintain that flexibility and recognize it. I think it's wonderful how you said it. It's perfect. Just like you need options.
And I think you get at a really crucial point about federal funding. And I feel like this is the right place to share this perspective because what's so fascinating is that people who mean well make allegations that the government wastes a lot of money, right? I mean, we've all heard those allegations, right? And so in response to that, what the government does is decentralize its spending through these CDBG, CSBG, ESG grants that are then distributed to organizations that submit RFPs and then they get scored and ranked and all of those things. And then they have to spend the money in that particular way. And all of that is true. What is so fascinating is that the people who are making those allegations are necessitating a level of bureaucracy that creates the very waste that they are complaining about.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how to say that more clearly, but it's just a fascinating thing because you're exactly right. I mean, the restrictions, it's not just about the agility. It's about, I would have to hire a full-time staff person to report on this money, and none of the money would cover the full-time staff person that I would have to hire. So that would be 20, 40, 60 people that I wouldn't get to help with rent just to receive this money that dehumanizes the human being that is trying to receive it, dehumanizes the interaction with the human being who needs help, and creates a level of bureaucracy. I mean, it would blow your mind. I have seen people get mad standing in line at Starbucks. It would blow people's minds if they understood what someone had to undergo to get some help with their phone or with their rent through some of these government funded programs.
Yep.
It's astonishing and
embarrassing. And that's where, for so long, I actually one day I actually I spent some actual time looking into it, because so many often we hear people say, well, I'm a successful business person, and so therefore I can do this better. And I've never heard someone get up there and be like, I've been running nonprofits, and guess what? I can do it better. And I looked into it, and it's very few folks that operate in the nonprofit world wind up in office. And I think that that's wrong, because I look at it and I'd say, like you, I'm trying to make the most of every dollar that comes in the door to deliver those resources. And it's a constant battle of, do I apply for this grant? Is it too heavy? Is it too administratively intensive? And I know for, organizations that I've worked for, we're always striving to keep that those overhead costs well below 10%. And that is not the normal for a lot of nonprofits. And it's because, like you said, we've outsourced the bureaucracy to a less regulated bureaucracy and added somehow even more bureaucracy, which is, in fact, like I said, that's where the waste is coming from, as opposed to, hey, how do we stretch each and every one of these dollars in a way that's going to have a maximum impact? And like I said, in business terms, you would say, what's the return on investment for these programs? In some cases, if it was managed appropriately, there'd be a huge return on that investment. But when you add unnecessary bureaucracy into it, then suddenly it's like, nope, now you're paying more in administrative costs than you are to actually, help the individuals.
And I think you get at a really challenging fundamental flaw for the sector. The overhead ratio, it's predicated on an arbitrary designation of what determines efficiency. The reality is that we can have this conversation because I have lights, because I have technology that works, and because I have internet. Nobody wants to pay for the toilets to flush, but let me tell you, the toilets need to flush at my nonprofit. And so, these conversations, I am overhead and I am program and I am a CEO that has my own caseload, and I work with people who have the most complex, challenging, intractable problems or attitudes. And I promise you that I am not, that as overhead, I am a great return on investment. I've probably seen 20 people into housing. I've probably prevented as many evictions just from my caseload. And that saves, an averted eviction saves the community $50,000 a year for 5 years. Eviction court, those kinds of proceedings, emergency services, healthcare services, police services, shelter services, all of the services that then come into play once someone becomes homeless, notwithstanding the challenge they will have getting back in until the statute of limitations on that eviction has run out.
No, and that's a great point. And it's funny because I do spend a lot of time thinking about how do we make that case? How do we talk about those things? And we need a better way to measure that effectiveness. And because like you, I'm the same way. I'm also, work with, and the program I'm managing right now is more focused on small business owners. But same thing, I've got a client caseload I work with, and usually it is when one of my counselors is like, I don't know how to deal with this person. I'm like, all right, I'll work with them, work through those issues. And that's the reality of being in a nonprofit world. Is any nonprofit world, you're not just wearing a single hat. You're wearing multiple hats. If it's a good one. Obviously there's plenty out there that have way too much folks that are just out there to measure things. Yep. Um, Gary, you're being awfully quiet, which is unusual for you. I just want to give
I'm sitting here just fascinated by this whole conversation because this is stuff I don't hear. And if I'm not hearing it, other people aren't hearing it. I mean, this is a tutorial in your areas. And I was going to ask, Kristy, do you have homeless military veterans?
Yes,
So,
approximately 10% of the people that we see on an annual basis are veterans. Many fewer are active duty, but we do occasionally see folks who are active duty. Yeah.
uh,
Yep.
turning it over to you, Joe. At that point, I'm just
Well, and I think I've said a couple of times that that's something that I wish I could say it was surprising, but when you dig into this, I think just the other day I was talking about the housing issue in a different context. We were talking about homelessness. We are just talking about affordability. You know, the basic housing allowance for Colorado Springs does not cover rent. So you have service members that are digging into their non allowance to pay for housing, and that's kind of the trade off, by the way. So it sounds weird. I want to be like, oh, they had to pay out a salary to get a house. Well, we all have to pay out but the way military pay is structured is you have an allowance specific for housing, and that's why they make slightly less. And there's a whole math there, different conversation, but yeah, and this is, and I'll bring it back to the national security issue because when we talk about wanting to keep things like Space Command here, well, if a service member is going to move to this community to be part of any command and can't afford to live here, well, guess what? DoD is going to stop sending them here. And so this is a community issue. And again, it's things that people aren't seeing the entirety of the problem because you don't see a well-kept soldier or service member sleeping on a park bench because that's not where they are. But it is something that's happening. And I wish that the commands would be a little bit more involved in that too. I think sometimes that the garrison commands aren't necessarily as attuned to that as maybe they should. They're more attuned to the food insecurity piece, but yeah, this is the reality of what we're facing, and this is why this problem impacts every single one of us. Because we need to make sure that if we're going to be truly a military-friendly community, if we're going to be a friendly community, housing affordability impacts every aspect of what we're doing, and it is not a problem that is just simply restricted to folks that are struggling with addiction and mental health. These are people that have come on tough times at an unexpected expense and pushed them into this situation. And when you connect them with folks like Kristy and programs like that, that experience in homelessness can be brief. But that's where the systematic component comes to of making sure that we know how to identify people, what resources exist in the community, make sure those resources have what they need to bring those programs to bear, and make sure that's coordinated as well, so that as we're moving folks across different organizations, we can coordinate with each other to make sure that nobody falls through the cracks.
There's so
Chris,
much there. But I want to hear Gary because he's being quiet, and I want to hear from you because I want to say.
well, I, as I said, this is a tutorial for me, and what I'm looking at or I'm thinking about is, what about the future? What are we looking at here? Is there a future? Or is it just going to be slugging it out day by day, minute by minute, hour by hour, client by client?
Yeah, I want to answer that because I actually have an answer to that. Mostly because I spent some time thinking about it today. But the one thing that I do want to say is that I think that it really serves us in the space. If you've studied the history of policy around poverty, you know that Ronald Reagan in particular got a lot of traction denigrating, welfare parents. And I think that moving into the future, we have to reject the bifurcation of human beings into deserving and undeserving categories. I think that the way that we are managing our service members and military populations is unconscionable. And as you noted, Joe, when we can intervene early with the correct intervention, we can turn an episode of homeless into a single episode of homelessness instead of chronic homelessness. And you know what effect that has? It reduces mental health issues and substance use disorder. And so I would say that the mental health challenges and substance use disorder that we see that perhaps is part of the characterization of the most visible element of people experiencing homelessness. It is very, very important that we get the sequencing right, because the vast majority of them developed acute PTSD from their experience of being homelessness, and potentially sought self-medication alternatives as a result of their disenfranchisement and marginalization and inability to access resources. So I do want to say that. And then, if I can, I mean, I'd love to give you a chance to respond, but I do want to respond to Gary about, what's the future, because I do have an idea about that.
I go for it. We're counting up on our 30 minutes, so I figured let it go, and I'll make some final comments, and I'll let you make some final comments, and we'll wrap this.
Okay, great. So, what I've been thinking about in this moment where everything seems so uncertain and so fraught and so challenging, and it just seems that the social fabric is unraveling before our eyes. And I don't know that it's anyone's intention to do it this way, but what if we entertain the idea that our years and potentially decades, I mean, really since the reformulation of TANF, of working to duct tape and dental floss and bubble gum the systems together that we know are failing. I don't think it's anyone's intent. I think they just want to decimate the systems of support. But what if we just accept the discomfort of this moment? We don't know what's going to happen, but we might be in a better position building back up from nothing than trying to repair something that we all know is broken. And so that is the hope that I am carrying in my heart. I am really looking to the next generation of political leaders to lead that change, because I think that what we're seeing right now feels very soulless and very heartless. And we can take this as an opportunity to build from ground zero something that actually serves our souls, our humanity, and our communities. And that's what I hope that we can all do together. And it's going to be really uncomfortable, and buckle up, and it's going to suck. And I think we can build something better on the other side.
That's perfect. And I think I share that optimism of, hey, we are in an uncomfortable phase right now, but on the other end of that, we do have a huge opportunity to start building things. And Gary, you talk about this being a tutorial for some of the specifics of conversations that are occurring among those of us that aren't leaders in the nonprofit space. It's also a tutorial, I think, hopefully for folks that listen to a lot of the things I've said over the past 7 months we've been doing this now, right? Voices like Kristy's are the ones that I want to be elevating in the next Congress, because it's folks like her that see this day to day. That's where the solutions lie. That's where we can build something that truly serves our community. And I love that you bring spirituality into it too, because I think that is something that when we think through, these people that come up there and say, well, I'm Christian and I want Christian values. It's like, well, Jesus helped the homeless. Let's follow that example and do something that really is consistent with our values, and do it in a way that's going to serve our neighbors, even if they don't have a house, because that's exactly what we can be doing. So Kristy, I will leave space for you to make any final comments, but I'm so appreciative that you were able to join us and have this conversation. And you're welcome back here anytime. And like I said, you've got my number, and always willing to take a call from you whenever you have any good ideas. Or also, I'm also very well aware that all of us have those very, very frustrating days where sometimes you just need someone that's going to call and be like, I just need to yell at somebody. And believe me,
when they need to yell.
but that's the strength that we need in the community. And I think that's why people that are successful in the nonprofit world are those folks that can sit there and be like, I get you, I get it, and I'm going to listen to you, and then we're gonna move forward from there. So appreciative of you joining us on this episode of the podcast.
Well, thanks for having me, and just incredible respect for the work both of you do. And Gary, I just have to nod again to we've been in this work together for I think a couple decades, and my life is better for it, and I'm a smarter person for it. So thank you.
You're welcome. And that's another wrap of Joe Reagan's conversation with your special guest, Kristy Milligan of Westside Cares. Thank you so very much.